Okay, we're ready to start. Welcome everybody to San Francisco Tomorrow's new way of dealing with the public, inviting them to things. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. My name is Joni Eisen. I'm on the board of San Francisco Tomorrow, an organization which is very old but relatively unknown. I'll just tell you a tiny bit about it. It was founded in 1970 by activists who got together in the 60s to fight the neighborhood freeway wars and all kinds of environmental zoning wars, things that were going on at that time. And now it is a citywide organization concentrating on the environment, on making San Francisco a livable city, concentrating on the environment because we believe that a healthy environment is the foundation for a healthy community. So anyway, that's San Francisco Tomorrow. If you want to know more about it, we have these little handouts. They're just a quarter sheet, they're just little. Also, if you want to sign up and get more information from us, make sure you give us your email so you can get into that kind of thing. And what else do I have to say? Okay. So, oh yeah, now the introduction to the actual program. Yeah, in the face of federal hostility and state inadequacy on climate, more than ever, it's down to the cities. So in California, as you probably know, the governor, behind closed doors, fashioned some legislation, which was then quickly passed by the legislature to extend his wonderful cap and trade program for decades, which inherently is unfair and has really negative impacts on communities that can least withstand such impacts, environmental impacts. And on the federal level, of course, you know what's been going on. So it's time for the cities to take the lead. So that's why we're having this panel. I'm excited that these panelists get to all meet face to face for the first time. And so I'll just introduce the moderator, and then she'll introduce the panelists, and we'll be going. All right. So Claire Lau is co-founder and co-chair of SF Berniecrats, which is an organization which its goal is to forward the Bernie Sanders platform. Let's see what it is here. Yes, for the Sanders campaign platform on a local level by advancing social, economic, environmental, and racial justice. And she's been an environmentalist since a young age. How long has that been? And while she was still in college, she chaired an environmental group called New Leaf. And prior to immigrating to the U.S., Claire was active in the pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong. And outside of her activism, she's an artist and an educator. Thanks for being in, and take it away, Claire.
Thank you, Joni. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, SF Tomorrow, for organizing this panel. Before I get started with introducing the panelists, I just want to say that we printed out some copies of this article about cap and trade written by Adam Scow, who's from Food and Water Watch, and we'll pass them around and you can take a look. And we also have some printouts of the newsletter from the San Francisco Berniecrats. So let me introduce the panelists. So today we have Debbie Raphael, a scientist by training and a public servant by profession. Debbie Raphael has spent over 20 years working in government to ensure that everyone has an equal right to a safe and healthy environment. As director of the San Francisco Department of Environment, she believes that cities can take bold action to address environmental harm and works closely with other city agencies and community stakeholders to implement San Francisco's ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals while advancing policies and programs that are inclusive of diverse communities and build on the city's innovative and pioneering spirit. Debbie holds a bachelor's degree in biology from UC Berkeley and a master's degree in physiological plant ecology from UCLA. So mouthful. So give a hand for Debbie. So David Shearn works as an internist, or worked as an internist, cardiologist, and healthcare executive for over 30 years. He focused on driving change deep into organizations with goals of simultaneously improving health outcomes, service quality, and affordability. In retirement, he volunteers for 350 SF, 350 Bay Area, and the Climate Reality Project, with the objective of lowering greenhouse gas emissions through innovative public policy. He grew up in the East Bay and currently resides in SF. And Sue Vaughan is a 27-year resident of the Richmond district, right here. She committed herself to living a car-free life in the 1990s. In 1990, for environmental reasons. She's an educator, freelance writer, and artist. We have a lot in common. Yeah. She has been a Sierra Club member since 1998 and active with the club since 2006. A 2016 recipient of San Francisco Tomorrow's Unsung Hero Award, Sue currently serves as vice chair of the Sierra Club San Francisco group. So give it up for Sue. So I think that this panel is very timely, thinking about what we've just seen happen in Houston and in Florida right now with Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and we've seen, the impacts of climate denial both on the federal level, state level, and so here, as the leader, we want to think of ourselves, leading in all these fronts in the country. What can we do here in San Francisco? So in this panel, I'm going to just start by asking the panelists a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. And when that happens, you can just raise your hand. Okay, so the first question will have a maximum of 10 minutes, but you don't have to take all 10 minutes if you don't feel like you need 10 minutes. So what are your climate change goals, and how do you plan on pursuing them, within your organizations? So maybe we'll start with Debbie, because I think you have more background information to give.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you all for the invitation. It's an amazing turnout. I am so gratified by the fact that you're all here to talk about something that is incredibly important to me as a human being and also as a profession, as a public servant, which is something I'm a big believer in, the importance of public service. So what I'm going to do is I brought some slides because they help me stay on my time, and they've got some images that I think are useful to get us started. Because what I want to do right now is talk about, so where is the city in terms of its goals for climate change? What are we saying our goal is? How are we doing? And then what's coming up next? What do we need to focus on? So that's what I want to do in, I hope, under 10 minutes. So, the reduction targets. San Francisco has adopted essentially a Paris-compliant framework where we are looking at 1990 as our baseline. That's what Kyoto Protocol started with. And we're looking at our inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a little bit wonky now. But we're claiming, we are promising as a city that we are going to get by 2017, that's this year, 25% below our 1990 levels. Then in 2025, we'll get to 40% below, and then by 2050, we're going to get to 80% below, because that is where scientists are telling us we pretty much need to go. I mean, we got to get to carbon neutrality, but at least for as much as we can by 2050, we've got to be 80% below. So when you look at those numbers, the first thing there's two things I hope you take away. One, those are pretty bold numbers, great. Number two, we're in 2017, so how are we doing? That's a fair question to ask. So we also know that when I talk to Mayor Lee or the Board of Supervisors with numbers like this, even though they signed off on them, their eyes kind of glaze over. They don't know what to do with this kind of information, nor do most human beings who aren't climate wonks, right? They look at this and say, well, what is it I have to do differently so that the city meets those goals? So we've changed the way we talk about the goals in a much more simplified term. And this is how I think about San Francisco's climate action goals. 0, 50, 100 routes. 0, 50, 100 routes. And that will, I hope, become the framework for if we talk about climate action here. So what does that mean? 0 means zero waste. Zero waste to landfill or incineration. 50% of trips in sustainable modes, that means out of single occupancy vehicles. That number actually needs to be higher than 50 because we're at 50 right now, but we're working to get that to an 80. But right now it's 0, 50, 100% renewable energy. Okay, so that means essentially a fossil fuel free future, right? We have to get off of gasoline, we have to get off of diesel, we have to get off of natural gas, and we have to replace it with energy, with electricity that's from 100% renewable or at least greenhouse gas free emissions. So that's 0, 50, 100. I like to say 0, 50, 100 is how we do less bad in the world. Roots is how we actually heal the planet. So roots is about reversing global warming. It's about pulling CO2 out of the air. It's not enough to put less in. There's too much in there right now. We have to pull it out. So how do we pull CO2 out? We do it by planting trees. We do the best we can in San Francisco. Trees are, there's not a native to this area, but we still have a very aggressive urban forestry plan. We do it by ripping out concrete anytime we can and supporting biodiversity. But most importantly and most excitingly, the data from UC Berkeley is showing that when we take our food waste, turn it into compost, spread it on rangeland, that actually the soil fertility is so radically changed by that one addition of compost that soil becomes a tremendous carbon sink. So this is going to be the secret to solving climate change if we can bring it to scale. So 0, 50, 100 roots. That's how I think about how we're going to meet our targets. So how are we doing? Well, since 1990, we have the most recent data we have verified is for 2015. Now remember, who can remember what our 2017 goal was?
25%.
25%, all right. So in 2015, we know how we're doing. We know that between 1990 and 2015, the city grew in population by 19.5%, and our GDP grew by 78%. Now if you're Donald Trump, you're going to say, well, that must mean that your carbon emissions went up because we know you have to choose between environment and economy. Well, Donald Trump, I'm afraid you're mistaken, because if you look at what San Francisco has achieved in that period, we have reduced our emissions by 28%. So we have exceeded our 2017 goal by 2 years. Now, did we do that by closing the Potrero power plant? It turns out no. We didn't even count that as part of our emissions inventory. So we did that through the fact that we do have a much cleaner grid, our public transit system, the decisions we made about density and transit, bringing those together. There's lots of things that go into that number. All right, so that's where we are now. So where do we need to go in the future? All right, let's take a look at where our emissions are coming from. So this is the 2015 pie, which I don't know if you can read it in this lighting. Anyway, all right. So basically, there's a few things I want you to take away from this. Number one, the municipal is purple, and it's pretty small. So yes, it's really important for the city to lead by example because we're proving concept, but if all we do is have green city operations, we're not doing anything. The other thing to notice is that the commercial and residential building sector, so the buildings, the built environment, and the transportation environment are where things are. It's buildings and it's transit. And the cleaner our energy is in our buildings, the bigger that transit pie is going to be. So it's really important to see where, this is going to tell us where the action is. Where do we need to focus our attention to get to our goals? So here are the 5 things we need to do as a city in order to get to that goal. Number 1, we've got to massively deal with existing buildings. We've got great laws on the books for new construction, but it's the existing building stock with its energy inefficiency that we've got to tackle. So that's number 1. Number 2, there is nothing natural about natural gas. So a lot of our buildings, whoever came up with that phrase is brilliant, because it sounds like it's a lovely thing. We roll on natural gas. And isn't it a bridge fuel? Well, it's a bridge to nowhere, because natural gas is methane. Methane is one of the most potent climate pollutants there are on the planet, and we are leaking it on our way into our buildings, and we're burning it into the atmosphere. So there is nothing natural about natural gas, and ultimately we have to get off of it. Where is it being used in our city? It's being used to heat buildings. So that, and it's in stoves. So it's people's cooking and it's heating. The third area is transportation. This is a key, and I have a feeling we're going to talk about transportation today because it's so much on everybody's mind who lives in this city. It's a stubborn sector. It's not easy. And the problem is, really, we're going to have to get people out of cars, and then any vehicle on the road is going to have to be off of a fossil fuel. It can't be on diesel. It can't be on gasoline. We're going to have to electrify everything. All right, fourth, landfills. So if you look at our landfill waste, you'll actually see that even though recycling and composting is going up, we're actually sending more organics to landfill, because organics is anything that can biodegrade. So it's cardboard, it's paper, and it's food. Think about Amazon. Think about what we've seen in people's purchasing. Wood, cardboard, food, we're actually sending more of that to landfill. And when that gets into a landfill, it emits methane. Again, a very potent climate pollutant. So we have got to get people to compost and recycle more. So we are rolling out a new program. If there's questions about this, we can answer them. It's going to take about 2 years to get to everyone in the city. But what you'll see is the black bin is shrinking, the blue bin is growing, because we have retrofitted Pier 96 so that we can take many, many more things in your blue bin. And finally, the thing we have to do is we have to get more resilient, and we have to get smarter about the way we harness renewable energy by using battery storage. This is Marina Middle School. We're piloting a microgrid there where we're going to have battery storage and solar so that that area can be a place where people gather in a case of emergency. Finally, I just want to end with that 2018, next year, is going to be a really interesting moment for all of us in this room, because Governor Brown is bringing the world to San Francisco for a climate action summit. He is calling on everyone to be the antidote to Donald Trump and to push people in the next COP, the UN climate accords, to prove what subnationals are capable of, states and cities. San Francisco is going to be the hub. I would love the Sierra Club, the Berniecrats, the San Francisco Tomorrow, the 350.org. Let's think about what kind of community response and welcome we want to have for people who are coming to our city. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for all that very useful background information. And I think you even answered some of the next questions I was going to ask, but that's completely okay. So maybe David, you can speak a little bit about, what 350's climate goals are and what 350 is doing.
And you don't have to go over there. You can
What if I want to go over
You
there?
can. But make sure Ben is the one who's timing.
Okay. Well, it strikes me that before I tell you what we're doing and what I'm doing, I'd like to spend a couple of moments talking about why. And first of all, let me thank San Francisco Tomorrow, my fellow panelists, moderator, and then all of you for being here tonight. There are lots of other things you could be doing with your time. How many of you consider yourselves to be activists, by show of hands? So some of you are being modest, and some of you aren't so sure, but most of the people in this room. So how many of you who said you're activists would say that you've been activists for more than 30 years? Some of you aren't that old, I get that.
In the womb.
So those of you who just raised your hand in that category, how many of you thought we would still be dealing with this crap at this point? Well, I put myself in the category of somebody who sort of thought things would be getting easier by now. And so just so you know a little bit about me, I consider myself to be a scientist, but that's because I studied medicine, not because I studied climate or the natural world. I studied human beings. And my career was focused on taking care of patients, but also on education. And it started with teaching medical students and residents and then staff. And then I began teaching organizations, departments, and larger organizations. All of that focused on behavior change. So I consider myself somewhat of an expert on how people change, individually and in groups. And so I'm very interested in that. And that's part of the reason why I'm involved with 350 and in the climate crisis movement. But going back to my previous point, I thought after 30 years of work that I had earned, some time to put my feet up and listen to music and kind of take it easy and hang out with my wife. And I wasn't really thinking that I was going to be spending so many hours volunteering. And so then, right around the time that I retired, a couple of things happened. The first is the devastating election. And what I thought of coming out of that election is that I could either be miserable or I could do something. And when I thought about doing something, I thought so many of the horrible changes that are going to be instituted by our leadership are going to damage people. They're going to hurt people. But they're going to be, by and large, reversible. Not entirely, for sure, but many of them with improvements in the policies that have been decimated, we could get back to where we were. It seemed to me that the climate was too urgent a problem to put into that category, that the devastation that might occur over 4, I would hope us 8 years, might be more than the human race could actually tolerate. The second reason why is that I was enjoying a day at the beach with my son, who is 35, and he has 2 wonderful sons, our grandchildren. And we were talking about these issues. And he said something that broke my heart. He said, as we looked at his 2 boys frolicking in the sun, he said, they're happy now. And I'm really committed to giving them as much fun during this part of their lives as I can, because I'm actually not even sure that they're going to be having fun in the second half of their lives. That really hit hard. And I think we've already seen the climate change is happening. It's not in the future. But if we don't do anything, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And by the way, when people say, I'm worried about the planet, it's going to be fine. It's us that are screwed. And so I really want to impress upon you that the reason I'm doing this comes from my heart. And I hope that some of you will be inspired. I'm sure you're already involved, many of you. In fact, I know some of you, some of your work. But it's going to take all of us pulling in the same direction, taking action, if we're going to reverse the trends that have been set in place. Turning now to 350, the organization with which I've spent most of my volunteer work. 350 Bay Area and 350 San Francisco are examples of a network of local groups, actually across the state and across the country, that are inspired by the national and international organization called 350.org, although not actually financially affiliated. And we are committed to reducing greenhouse gases as rapidly and deeply as possible, and to do it in a way that is just for the communities that are being affected. Because as you well know, and as you said, the impact of climate change is not felt equally across all communities. We're doing this work through a number of different campaigns, and we'll talk more about that as the evening goes on, but I think there's plenty of room for any of you who would like to get involved in some of these campaigns with us. We have Speakers Bureau, we have a transportation campaign, we have a fossil fuel resistance campaign, and we have a legislative campaign that I'm involved with, and I may have forgotten 1 or 2 campaigns, but we divide the work into those categories, And we are 100% volunteer, but we depend on expertise from other organizations, including the Sierra Club and including experts in the city to help guide what we do. And that support is really important because none of us is absolute expert on the issues. But I'm going to talk about later some specific bills that we've been working on in our legislative area. I never did that kind of policy and advocacy work before, at least not at the state legislative level. And we've actually seen some amazing progress that we've been able to make. And so I want to talk more about that later. So thank you very much again for being here, and looking forward to a good conversation.
Thank you, David. And then Sue can talk a little bit.
Hi, everybody.
Door open again.
Yeah.
Get
Some air.
circulation, yeah.
We need more air.
There's no
Oxygen.
bubble.
Just no CO2.
Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Vaughan. I'm with the Sierra Club. I've been active with the Sierra Club for about 10 years. And we're an advocacy organization. We're a membership organization. And if you are a member of the Sierra Club, how many people here are members of the Sierra Club? So if you're a member of the Sierra Club, and there are about 9,000 members in San Francisco, you get to vote in our general elections. We have annual elections for our membership, and there are 9 of us on the executive committee, and I see 3 members of the executive committee right here in the room tonight. So there are 5 seats up for election this year. We, like I said, we're an advocacy organization, and we evaluate legislation. We write letters. We have letterhead. We write letters saying, we like this about the legislation, we don't like this, et cetera, et cetera. We read EIRs, we read draft EIRs, and we submit comment letters.
What's EIR?
Oh, I am so, Amy, thank you. Oh, hi, thank you. EIR, an environmental impact report, so so we read draft environmental impact reports, and we submit comment letters. We endorse ballot measures, and we endorse candidates, so this stuff all gets really intense. We are a political organization. The Sierra Club, we have our outings. We have our outings people who go off and take hikes and lead backpacking trips. But the SF group is a political organization. There are 9 of us who are elected, and there are a bunch of other people who come to the meetings and they're not elected, but they're on the Conservation Committee, and they're active and helping us come up with policies and positions on various projects like the Warriors or One Oak Street down at the intersection of Van Ness and Market, that huge, massive project, 400 feet high, I think, about. So we get involved in all of that stuff. And the SF group is a part of a regional group called the SF Bay Chapter. And the SF Bay Chapter is one of a number of chapters in the state of California. Most states only have 1 chapter. California has a whole bunch of chapters. And it's a very hierarchical organization, lots of different levels, and you get up to the top in California. The director is a woman named Catherine Phillips, and she's staff. And you are working with Kyle Jones and other folks up in Sacramento on legislation. And we do communicate with Catherine and Kyle. Now, we're volunteers. The 3 members of the executive committee who are in this room tonight, we don't get paid. We're volunteers. But obviously, we love what we're doing. We'd like to get paid, but it just doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. So I'm just going to throw out some numbers. I'm going to put up some numbers up here as we talk about these things locally. And I have my visuals, why we're all here tonight. All right, so 217%, 2%. We can talk about what these are. You can ask questions if you want. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. So I'm sitting there And just before we get into what those numbers are, I just want to tell you, I did bring material, so I brought the Sierra Club Yodeler. So if you're not a member, or if you're like me and you are a member and it didn't come in the mail, they're over there, okay? So you can get the Yodeler. This comes out a few times a year. It used to be every couple of months, but not anymore, because we're just putting our resources elsewhere. And if you're not a member, there's a little form over there that you can look at so that you can consider joining. And I highly encourage you to join. We are fighting the Trump agenda at the national level, at every level. We're fighting that agenda. So it's, and we file lawsuits. We lobby and we file lawsuits. We go to court. We do it at the national level. We do it here in San Francisco. We go to court. So I am an educator, and I'm doing substitute teaching because if I were a regular teacher, I wouldn't be able to be active in the Sierra Club or anything else. So I choose to be a day-to-day substitute. But in the meantime, I'm doing 8th grade math, and the students are learning scientific notation in math, and I don't know if you remember what that is. So I don't know. It was a refresher for me, and I just thought I'm going to go online and see if I can find anything that links climate change with scientific notation. And and I've been talking about climate change all the time and trying to bring math into climate change into the discussion every day in these classes, because I think it's so vital. And these are great kids, they're really receptive. So I found this article from Scientific American, Carbon Dioxide and Climate, and all these really old-fashioned scientific notation numbers, and I realized, my goodness, it must have changed. Well, this article is from 1959.
Yeah.
1959. And, so we've known about this. We have known about this for decades. And this is sinful, it is shameful, it should be illegal. There should be people in jail for this. So let's go look at these numbers, and let's talk about what these are, and how are we going to do this as a city. And this is what we spend time thinking about at the Sierra Club. One of the big things we talk about is infill housing. And what we want it to be is smart infill housing. We want it to be equitable. We want it to really work. We want people to be out of their cars. We don't want people to have a parking space and just say, oh, I'm just going to go get in my car and drive to the gym. We want people to say, I don't have to do that. We can walk. I want to walk. I want to be in the city. I want to walk. I want to take my bike. Or I want to take Muni. And we spend a lot of time thinking about this kind of thing, and in my opinion, we're not getting it right. So what are these figures? Well, 270%. The state sets goals for every metropolitan region in the state, housing goals. And so we're part of the MTC, and every community with the MTC has its own housing goals. In San Francisco, we have market rate housing goals, we have low income housing goals, and we have moderate income housing goals. Well, we're at 217% of our market rate housing goals. 217%. We're at about 20% of our moderate income and around 40%, I might not have these figures right, of our, so 20% of our moderate income and 40% of our low income, but so we are way behind. If we want a city that's equitable, and if we mean it, that we want infill housing, we don't want people living out in Tracy and having to drive into San Francisco to get to their jobs, then we have to have the housing for them. And building is part of it, it is not the only answer. All right, 2%. So a friend of mine was on the Peak Oil Preparedness Task Force a few years ago, and in 2000, so this is an old Green Party newspaper right here, but she wrote this article, and what they discovered is that of all the energy, expended here in San Francisco, only 2% of it is used on muni. 2%. And I don't know if it's changed, you would know more of that, but she has this great line. She says, can you say inefficient use of energy? And then, how about plenty of room for improvement? Yeah. Okay, so then let's go over here. This is the number of parking spaces in San Francisco. Now, I have not, now I don't know if this is people's personal garages. This is from a 2008 to 2014 survey. This is how much space, not square footage, but the number of spaces that we've dedicated to parking in San Francisco. This is the number, as of today, I looked it up, the number of registered vehicles in all categories in San Francisco. This is the number of muni vehicles, according to 2016. This is the number, and I always do this because the reason I got the Unsung Hero Award from the San Francisco Tomorrow last year was because of the work I was doing on getting the shuttle buses out of the public bus stops, which is a violation of California law. It is against the law. This is the number of vehicles, tech shuttle buses, that have placards. So look at the competition. Now, there are all kinds of, you might be saying, yeah, but they get cars off the road. Well, Ed Mason back there can talk to you about they get a few cars off the road. They are not reducing greenhouse gases because they deadhead back from the Silicon Valley. They go back and forth between San Francisco and the Silicon Valley, and one of those trips is empty. And we don't know how many riders they have because that's proprietary information. So we don't know if they're half full or full. We don't know. So space, our curb space, and there are layers of complications to this issue. Our curb space that we have set aside for our public transportation system is being taken up by private for-profit companies, making it hard for us to expand our public transportation, improve that efficiency, and be more equitable because our public transportation system is subject to Title VI federal laws that require it to go all over the place, and private public transportation systems don't have those requirements. So it is very hard for us to expand our public transportation system if private vehicles are using our curb spaces. In violation of the law. Okay, enough. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? About that? Because are they paying a little nominal fee, and are they going to be moved elsewhere?
So maybe we'll delve a little bit more into transport a little bit later. I just want to make sure we get to talk a little bit more about policy, and also want to hear a little bit more from 350 because we haven't really heard about the nitty-gritty yet. So the next question I was going to follow up was, I think two of you have talked a little bit about specifically what can be done on what you are working on in terms of your organization. So we have, in order to reduce carbon emissions, like more active approaches and passive approaches. Passive as in like regulatory, government imposing regulations, and then active as in like you making the choice as a person, as a San Franciscan, what to do. So maybe you can talk a little bit about these two approaches, what you are doing, what you suggest can be done more. And I'll start with David because we haven't heard as much from 350 yet.
Can I sit down while I talk?
Yeah.
Just speak up.
Yeah.
I will speak up. So, again, you'll probably hear a certain refrain from me because I do often think in terms of my experience in healthcare. And I think of the dichotomy you just posited as being similar to the challenge of public health versus primary care healthcare. So I spent most of my time taking care of patients one at a time in my office, helping them make wise choices, providing them with suggestions around treatment and prescribing examinations and medications when appropriate. But I was under no illusion that the, whatever, 3,000 patients that I took care of was gonna by itself improve the overall health of the community. And that's where public health comes in. And that's where you look at what are the changes, regulations, campaigns, programs that are going to be put out broadly, like vaccination and other such efforts. And that's actually the way that you improve the health of the community. So although my background is in sort of one person at a time, I'm convinced that without efforts to change city, county, and state regulations, we're not going to get to where we need to go. And if you look at a previous example, let's say efforts to get people to quit smoking, it's a perfect analogy. It's perfect in a couple ways. One, it's perfect in its corruption story, because for 3 or 4 decades, the companies that were producing cigarettes knew that they were poisonous and said they weren't. And I was just thinking about that when you were talking about methane, because the analogy to methane is then they said, well, here are filter cigarettes. It turns out they were no better at all. In fact, in some ways, people smoked even more, and so it was even worse. But they claimed right up until the point where it was impossible to claim it anymore that it was safe, just as the fossil fuel companies are making that claim about burning their product. I think it's very similar, sort of similar at an ethical level, but it's also similar in this same dichotomy, because although physicians were being actively trained and other healthcare workers to counsel their patients about quitting smoking, it wasn't until we began taxing the cigarettes very heavily and we began having public campaigns and we made it uncool for kids to smoke, and we actually changed sort of the culture. Actually in California first, and then in other places as well. So it took a combination of those two. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think that there does need to be individual choices. People need to be choosing, just as in medicine, making healthy choices, making the right choices for reducing CO2 emissions. But unless we're putting a lot of energy into public policy, we're not going to get to where we need to go.
You mentioned there are some bills that 350 is working on.
Well, you know, some of you, may know the sort of circuitous path of getting a bill passed. But at the beginning of the year, this is just at the state level, there were 1,000 bills in the queue to the end of the session. There are about 50 left, something like that, and I think only probably 25 of them are going to end up getting signed by the governor. So the reason I give you that introduction is because we were following and endorsing or opposing a large number of bills, maybe 30 of them at the beginning of the session. We're down to just a few that are still in play, but I want to tell you about one of them because I'm going to ask you to take some action, if you would. And that is SB 100. Have people heard of SB 100? Mm-hmm. So it actually fits really well with San Francisco's goals. This is to set statewide targets so that we would be to 100% renewable energy sources by 2045. And it actually has steps along the way. But we've heard from many people, including scientists and politicians, but especially from entrepreneurs, that kind of long-term vision is what will draw innovation into California. Because it's actually kind of easy to get halfway there, and it's really hard to get the other half of the way, or maybe another way of saying it is that the solutions don't yet exist to get us the final But if we have a lot of innovation and creativity, we will. So we have been fighting very hard for SB 100, and maybe I'll pause and come back to that a little later in terms of what the exact status of that is as a little teaser, so I can ask people to take action before we finish.
Okay, thank you. So maybe Sue, we'll mix up the order a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what can be done in the regulatory level and what can be done, on the personal active level? And if you want to respond to some of the
Okay, sure.
transit issues.
So I'm the regulatory level. Again, we're an advocacy organization, so I don't know so much. We more generally we respond to people's proposals for regulation, and we generate our own ideas. But you had another, the personal level. Okay, well, one of the things, so there is, and I'm not sure what this is called, but a Canadian high school teacher a few years ago, teaching about climate change to his kids a few years ago, wanted to know what people could do, what could they personally do, and if you actually did this, how much would you be saving in carbon emissions or in in greenhouse gas emissions? So he came up with this list, and you can go look this up. You can look up these two people, Seth Waynes, I think it's Waynes with an S, and Kimberly Nicholas. And this is the high school teacher right up here. This woman is, I think she's from the Bay Area, California, and she's a climate scientist, and she might be in Scandinavia now, I'm not really sure, but they came up with this list. So number 12, bottom of the list, upgrade your light bulbs. And you save a certain amount of greenhouse gases, hang dry your clothes, recycle, wash your clothes in cold water. The more I'm going up the list and getting to greater savings. Replace your gasoline car with a hybrid. Eat a plant-based diet. Now we're beginning to get into really meaningful things. Switch from an electric car to car-free. Now I don't know how to contact these people because there's a little bit of confusion in this list. Buy a more efficient car. Buy green energy. All right, so you have the opportunity. How many people here have signed up for Clean Power SF? All right, if you have not signed up for Clean Power SF, I encourage you to do it. I did it. I'm a renter. I'm in a 15-unit building, and I was able to do it, so sign up for Clean Power SF. This is our public power light. It's getting off of PG&E. It's getting to renewables. And you're still going to have your gas-fired stove and your gas wall heater, but your electricity is going to be generated by renewables. All right.
Can I just say one thing about that before
Yeah.
you go on? Everybody in San Francisco is signed up actually by default.
Yes.
But what you have to do is, if you haven't already done it, is actually go to the website and opt in for the 100% green option.
That's
which
right.
doesn't-
Thank you.
Which
Thank you.
doesn't cost very much. It's, I think for the average ratepayer, it's less than $10 a month.
Yeah.
And then you get 100% renewable energy. It's called
Super green. Super green. So go and opt in for the super green. So then you can avoid, not flying. I mean, and they say, oh, just don't take one transatlantic trip. Well, I haven't taken a transatlantic trip in decades. So, they tell you exactly what the carbon savings are, the greenhouse gas emission savings. Live car-free is number 2, and have one for your child. So there's a list. Go look these up. Go look them up. You can look at the list. And these are things that all of us can do. We can all drive less. We can all eat fewer animal-based products. We can change our light bulbs. Those things we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie, would you like to talk? Maybe you have more on the
Well, I would just sort of
regulatory?
add a little bit of filler in. So this founder of Bloomberg Energy News said something that I thought was really telling. He said, when it comes to energy, policy is destiny. And he was really talking about what David was talking about, is that if we're really going to move the needle, we need to have policies that is destiny. And the reason it's destiny is it's another thing David alluded to, although he wasn't as overt as I'm going to be, is that is the power of the private sector to move the needle a lot faster than any policy can. So while we can pass laws here in San Francisco and we can pass laws in California, it's when the innovators create a Tesla that people want to drive, or bring down the cost of batteries so everybody can have access to it, or create new financial models for solar power purchase agreements so you don't actually buy the panels, you can rent them. It's that kind of innovation on the private sector that really drives and accelerates change. Now, how do they make those investments? They make them because they see the policy direction. And so it's very critical to have that interplay, which is why SB 100 is so important. Not because we know how we're going to get there, but because we have to signal that we must. And the state of Hawaii actually is now the first state in the country to adopt 100% renewable standard. They're an island thousands of miles from anybody. They can do it. I believe that we can do it as well. But it's that interplay between the policy and the private sector that is really the secret in California. In terms of personal action, we need to get real about what matters and what doesn't, what just makes us feel better and what really makes a difference. And it's lists like the ones that Sarah just put forward that get us thinking about what is it. Oh, did I say Sarah? I'm looking at Sarah and I'm thinking Sue. Sue, sorry Sue. See, I really screwed it up, Claire. Okay, and this is on tape too. Oh, how embarrassing. All right, it's okay.
What's your name?
I know. I'm David. Anyway, so David and I were talking about another list that we have been very intrigued with because it challenges you to really think about your personal behavior. And that's something called Project Drawdown, which is, I see some nods, Paul Hawkins' latest list. And his number 1 on his list, so he has the 100 most impactful things to do to reduce carbon. The number 1 on his list has to do with CFCs and refrigerants. He said he was really bummed. It's not very sexy, but in fact, it's the most important thing we can do. But interesting, number 3 is to eliminate food waste. So that's something that would be interesting to think about, how we do that better as a city, because I don't think we do it very well here. We have some little bits. And he said if you take 7 and 8, which are, to your point about less children, 7 is educating girls, and 8 is family planning. If you do that together, it becomes number 1. So when we think about impacts on climate change, yes, we do what's within our capacity to do, which is live car-free, eat a plant-based diet, and yet when we think about what's really going to heal this planet, they are things that are much broader than some of these technology fixes. They're much more fundamental to our existence as human beings. And that's kind of it's challenging to think about what does that mean for our lives, but I think we're invited at this moment in time to think seriously about that.
And Paul Hawkins wrote a book that you can buy, but also they have a website that's really accessible. And it's got all of these, it's called, I think it's drawdown.org, I believe. And the other thing I wanted to mention about that is wearing my other hat at the Climate Reality Project, which some of you may know is Al Gore's organization, the one he started. We are developing a local Bay Area chapter. And one of our first events is actually to have Paul Hawkins come and talk. And so if you want to come to that, that will be October 5th at 7 o'clock at Genentech. And he's supposedly a very entertaining
He's
speaker.
wonderful. I've heard him and he's fantastic.
Okay, great.
Does one need reservations, or just if 100 come or if 1,000 come?
It's a really big room. I think there'll be plenty of room.
So it's one in Mission Bay, Genentech in Mission Bay?
The one in
South City?
South San Francisco.
Oh.
Oh, South San Francisco, not in St. Louis.
Sue has one more little thing about
So,
policy.
you know, because our group is so focused on San Francisco policy, and we are, you know, expanding Muni and having a much more fully functioning public transportation system is so vital to, so much a part of this picture.
Yep.
One of the things, I don't have it up here on the board really, but you know, here are our vehicles, that's the number of vehicles. That's from 2009, that really low percent that Muni, the energy that Muni used compared to all the other energy in the city. You know, we have all this development going on in the city, just cranes all over the place, especially in the downtown. There's a tremendous amount of building going on. And like I said, it's mostly market rate housing. But the developers, there's something called the Transportation Sustainability Fee, and it's where the developers pay a fee into a fund to expand capital projects for Muni. But it's now under discussion the possibility of increasing that fee. So there's a task force that's meeting. I've been to one meeting, I'm not actually on the task force, but the fee that they now pay is they get a 2/3 discount. So if you're the Sierra Club has a position that if you're developing a project, you should pay for the full 100% of your impacts to transit. Instead of a 2/3 discount. So, and there are other things, but that's a policy thing. I mean, let's get to fully funding our public transportation system.
Yeah.
Say again, the contact was for people who want to work on that?
Well, there's a task force that's been convened. It's the mayor, I believe the mayor appointed a number of the members of the task force. And then Aaron Peskin is the chair of the SFCTA, and I think he may have appointed some people. So you could contact, I'm not sure, I mean, the way I found out about it was somebody called me up on the phone and said, hey, Sue, did you know about this thing? And I'm like, no. And so I showed up at the meeting. I mean, you could probably contact your district supervisor. You could contact the SFCTA. I mean, these are public meetings, so anyone is welcome to come. They are public.
Yes, in the
We-
middle of the day.
We can also try to look that up and maybe
Late afternoon.
send it to the SF Tomorrow newsletter and they can send it out. We'll
Yeah.
find a way to find out. A lot of things in City Hall are kind of hard to
They
find
are.
out if you don't know about it. So it's just past 8 o'clock. I think I'll just open it up to the floor, and then if some questions don't get asked, I might ask you a few more questions. And I remember that somebody was asking about, Catherine was
Yes.
asking about.
Oh, so
Yeah, I'm aware of those, you know, the Google buses parking in Moody, but I thought there was something that was going to change where they couldn't park there, and I think they pay like a minuscule fee, right? If anybody knows.
Okay, so they pay, I don't know that they're paying anything now because there's some sort of discrepancy going on, but they pay, it's a cost recovery fee for the administration of the program. It's not increasing our revenue, it's not so that we can expand Muni, it's not so that they can offset the impacts to housing. Because there's a concern about the link between the availability of these buses and the increasing rents and evictions and displacedness. There's been no study done. So that it is a cost recovery fee simply for the administration of the program. And if it happens to exist, and if they're actually collecting that money right now, because if you go to the controller's report, they have a to be announced and a question mark, they don't know how much the fee is going to be. Even that, according to Proposition 26, which the state of California passed in 2010, the Tech Shuttle Bus Commuter Program is a voluntary program, and we could be charging more, but we're not. And myself and some other people, we've been trying to get a hold of the legal opinion for why we're not charging more, we can't. So, yeah.
It's still in progress, hoping though.
No, it's a permanent program. the pilot is over, a permanent program has been adopted, but we are investigating, there's some of us that are still investigating it, and it remains a violation of the California Vehicle Code.
What is the cost recovery?
That means, so and this shouldn't take up that much of this program tonight, but the cost recovery is, so the SFMTA administers a program that allows them to use the bus stops, and they just pay a small fee for the cost of administering the program.
So I'd like to take a few more questions. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 on the first row. Yes.
Okay, first of all, my name's Tom Pendergast, and I'm with the Richmond Review and the Sunset Beacon newspapers. And I have a question actually for you, Ms. Raphael, since you're with the city.
Okay.
Over the last 7 years, the west side of San Francisco has pretty much lost all of their recycling centers. Hank got thrown out. Safeways, none of them have recycling centers anymore.
Right.
There's, they've pretty much disappeared.
Right.
Yet the city keeps talking about, well, they want to encourage recycling. This seems like a conflict. It doesn't seem to add up. So I was wondering if you could address, now people, if they want to, go to recycling for the large rate, they have to drive over to Bayshore instead of just driving down the street. They've got to drive over here. So I'm wondering if you could address that of what's the logic there of allowing these.
I can answer that question. I've actually had a correspondence with the city and with San Francisco Department of the Environment about it. And the east side of the city also lost their recycling, and nobody wants to be driving out to the dump either. There are stores that are taking recycled bottles now, and Walgreens is on the list. There's probably about 20 stores. I think that SF Environment can send it out, is that right?
Yeah,
Well, there's 2 on
Right.
the west side.
So the
right.
timing of this question is actually wonderful when we talk about the legislative session. So I've been director for 3 years, and when I first came to the city to be director, this was one of the first issues that came to my attention, with people saying, San Francisco's closing recycling centers. That seems incredibly crazy given our zero waste goal and our commitment to recycling. And these are redemption centers. So the people who are hurt by this closure are the people who depend on this money back for their own income or for the work they do in public service. Those are the people using these centers. And the problem I came up with was that this is this law that determined how you create a recycling center was passed in 1987. It hasn't been changed since then. And it is so rigid that we tried to do creative things like create mobile centers or change the way the buyback works so that there's more flexibility to do this. And we kept getting, no, that's illegal, that's illegal. So for 3 years, we've been working on a bill to give San Francisco more flexibility to create recycling centers that aren't like big hanks, that aren't giant centers, but that are more neighborhood appropriate. And Scott Wiener, our senator, just got one through. I am so excited. It just passed the Assembly, going back to the Senate. We expect the governor to sign it because we've been working very closely with the governor's office and CalRecycle, the agency that regulates this, that will allow San Francisco to pilot some new technologies and new systems so that we can bring recycling redemption centers back to the city. Because right now, what Safeway does, for example, is they have a choice. They can either recycle in their store or they can pay $36,000 a year to the state of California as what's called an in lieu fee. In lieu of offering money back, I buy my way out of it. I pay $36,000 a year. So that's what Safeways are doing. That's what Whole Foods is doing. That's what Trader Joe's is doing in San Francisco. They are all paying $36,000 a year to the state so they don't have to recycle in their parking lots. So that means that we have $1.5 million leaving this city, going to the state so that people don't have to have recycling centers. And that's just insanity, right? If I could use that money to create recycling centers that were well staffed and were clean and were quiet, That's the answer, not having this crazy in lieu fee with all this money coming out. So now that this bill, I expect it to be signed, I hope it's going to be signed.
Yeah,
It's SB 458. Scott Wiener, thank you very much. SB 458, we need the governor to sign it, because that will allow us to work more cooperatively with Safeway and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods to say, rather than send that money out, what if we create a consortium of supermarkets to start making these smaller, more flexible systems? So that, I mean, you're absolutely right, your timing is beautiful to ask the question, because if you had asked it a year ago, I would have been wringing my hands, saying that the state had promised to solve this, and they haven't. So this is not just a problem in San Francisco. They're getting closed all across the state because it's a really old law that needs to be updated.
Is that going to be making an exemption from that law for San Francisco, or is it going to be overhauling the whole law?
So that's a great question. It is not overhauling the whole law. It is giving the ability for 5 cities in the state to apply for pilot status to experiment with new mechanisms and technology, and we will be one of them. It's a great question.
I had a question because I think a lot of the focus on how to, what can we, what can the city do, like, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions focuses on housing, focuses on transportation, focuses on solar energy, renewables. But and I don't quite know what the solution is, but I'm wondering, how do we get people to move towards a plant-based living? Because that's supposed to be one, if not with transportation, one of the #1 ways. I think I recently saw a report that if everybody switched to like 1 or 2 meatless meals a week, it was the equivalent of reducing like 19% of green. It's ridiculous, like how much it is. So we hear so much about transportation, which is fantastic. I love it. We hear so much about people moving to renewable energies, clean power, SF. That's fantastic. But we hear absolutely nothing about moving people away from animal-based products.
And it's like
what
bacon, bacon, bacon.
Disgusting. So I just was wondering if you had any ideas about that. I personally switched to being a vegetarian, but that's an individual choice that I made this year. I'm having a really difficult time convincing other people to do it. So I don't know if at the policy or the bigger level, that's something that anybody else thinks about.
We need help, yeah.
Taxes things, and I honestly, I can't say that I know what the position of the Sierra Club is, I don't. But I would say, let's tax meat, let's tax animal-based things, let's tax carbon, let's tax, and then lower people's income taxes. If it's gonna have too much of an impact on poor people, just lower their income taxes, but tax the consumption of them. That's my idea.
Of course, you're absolutely right on a theoretical basis, but on a strategic level, it's a real challenge. Because imagine what the public policy would be to push people to stop eating meat. When not only is there not a consensus among the populace that that's a good idea, but actually it's the opposite. So I think a lot of climate experts are really perplexed about this, and I know you're not going to like my answer, but I actually think that it's just something that's going to have to come a little later in the process. That doesn't mean we can't influence our friends and our communities, but that's not going to actually have the kind of savings that those projections claim. You have to start reclaiming farmland. You have to start not having cows out there, and so many people have to give up meat before you start getting those kinds of impacts. Absolutely critically important, but I think the reason why you see people focusing on some of these other issues, solar, transportation, which as you saw on the slide was something like 47% in San Francisco, is because they lend themselves to policy changes, and there are models already existing for doing that, not because they're more important, just as you're saying.
And I know this, are you guys wanting to comment on this issue? Yeah, because I would love to hear. I want to say one thing, and I just want to use your example of the cigarettes, of how you change the social norms. And for the young people in this audience, how do you guys change the social norms so that it isn't a meat-based diet. I don't know. It's a really hard thing. So there's a lot of energy around
Well,
this subject.
Let's hear some people.
Do you want to?
I think we'll finish that question.
Oh.
and then first.
Hi, Victor of San Francisco State. I am a graduate student. As you see the pie chart, transportation is a big issue. What is doing the city, taking in account all the risks of climate change in the city? These areas of the city, they are going to be under the sea level. I know the water department is increasing the level of the sewage pipes to the Bay Area, but in general, I don't see the real estate industry taking care of the climate change risk. So, I didn't see the preoccupation of the authority and the advocacy in a real census of the city. Who really owns the housing? Paris is a city who have a very strong fee on people who own properties, own departments, and don't use it to live. Obviously, they are using to rent or to Airbnb, or just is empty all the year because they use during 6 months for vacation. That sounds crazy, but it's a reality here in San Francisco. The second part is true. Title 24 is marvelous. The next version is going to recover energy after your shower. The hot water going to the sink is going to recover this energy to reheat the water is coming from your shower. But we have an all black market of repair of old houses. When we are going to change all the zoning to finally rebuild San Francisco? Not for real estate, it's for energy efficiency. Saying that, I expect. Very good. Thank you. My last thing. Methane is 72 times more damage than CO2. So if we recover methane and burn it, believe me, it's better than nothing.
So awesome. I mean, I just feel like we could have such a long night here. I mean, those are amazing issues. The issue of sea level rise and vulnerability, and how are we dealing with the private sector? Because the public sector, San Francisco, has been doing vulnerability assessments of the city infrastructure. In fact, in our capital planning process now, we have an assessment you need to do for how your capital planning investment is going to adapt or adjust to a very significant level of sea level rise. And there's going to be a huge discussion about this when it comes to the seawall and the ballot initiatives that's going to come out next year. So I think sea level rise is going to be very much in the public realm, and it would be lovely for San Francisco tomorrow to invite the port and others to come talk about what's going on in vulnerability and sea level rise. So yeah, I mean, and the airport's doing some really interesting things with their seawall as well. The problem is the private sector hasn't had to, for new construction, they can build it high, but for all of that existing infrastructure, and for Muni and BART, I mean, the vulnerabilities are huge. And, yeah.
So we cannot force it to change.
Oh, no. I think there's a tremendous amount of interest in, I just don't have the answer today. I feel like this intersection of mitigation and adaptation, which is the wonky way of saying that we're gonna have to adapt and figure out as a city how we do that. I don't have the silver bullet for it.
Do you have something?
Yeah, it was actually to link the meat comment and the comments about the infrastructure.
Okay.
That's good.
I
I
know.
don't know how you do that.
It's like, oh, we're gonna meet, but then I love what he was doing. I think some of this is possibly approaching the private sector of advertising and branding, and see if, for example, Pachamama Alliance had a huge free campaign from a really big advertising agency for 4 years ago. And Alice Waters, I think, for example, with the meat thing, like, I think when you're punitive with people, they're gonna get a double burger just to piss you off. But if Alice Watt, like I might just to, if I'm in a weird mood. Sorry, but like, you know, but if Alice Waters says, like, look at these great meals, and maybe didn't even mention that they don't have meat, she just talks about how great the meals are. You know, it's a lot of just like changing the, she cooks a lot of meat. You'd have to, but maybe talk to her, or with, you know, advertising agencies, it might be putting out the word in a really compelling way, kind of like we did in World War II. Like, do something for your country, even though we can't find you, you know, update the buildings, you know, and like, you know, like, I think a lot about all these old buildings and how they're like kind of tumbling down and they're not regulated and it's kind of a fire risk, and but it might be that we have to just think really creatively about how to get people excited. Somehow we were able to tap into this with World War II in this country, and everybody doubled down with victory gardens and just everybody participated. But I think with the climate change, it gets so upsetting and so overwhelming that people kind of dissociate and just get defended against it. Are you also a psychiatrist? Sorry.
Some days.
I know Robin here too.
Some days I need one.
Sometimes, I know, so do I, and I am one. But when you say you're a psychiatrist, it kind of ruins the event. So I said it. But just like kind of thinking about how to get people able to tolerate thinking about this, and even just like just shifting the energy around how heroic it would be, how fabulous it would be, how good it would feel to collaborate, how lovely it would be to be with neighbors, how nice it would be to feel like you did something when you could. And to just think, you know, when you train in medicine, you sort of constantly watch people not want to deal with reality and then get slammed. And so you're always trying to like, this is a real juggling act. I mean, this is like with Irma and Harvey and the forest fires, it's enough horror that a lot of people are a little bit waking up, and there's this window of opportunity where it is not Armageddon, but it's awful. And this is the zone where people start to wake up. So I think we need to really think about totally changing how we do it and inviting people in to the coolest party in town. The fuddy-duddy party. You know, but it's like...
Well, I love what you're saying, and so maybe people are going to be sick of medical metaphors, but you know, when you look at national statistics right now, more than 70% of Americans actually want to see action on climate. And yet, if you look at how many are involved, and involved even means letting your vote be influenced by the climate positions of the candidates, it's less than 20%. It's like 18%. So it is not the best party in town yet. The medical metaphor is that for years I saw this phenomenon, and I hope I'm not describing anyone in this room, but I will keep it confidential if it is. I would always try and counsel my patients to quit smoking, because I knew how risky it was to their health overall, but especially I knew that it was the most powerful risk factor for heart attacks, which was my specialty. And I was amazed at, well, occasionally there was a victory and people would quit, but it's a very powerful addiction and people had a lot of trouble. But you know what was amazing to me was when I would visit them in the coronary care unit, the day after they had had their heart attack, they had all quit smoking.
It's come to Jesus Day.
And I feel like we need, like we haven't all had a heart attack yet, but it's getting like in that direction.
There's daily traumas. It's you choose which one you're going to pay attention to.
And that can actually be, it can be disempowering. It can be so frightening and so frustrating. Like, where do I put the tip of my lever? Where do I? And I disagree. I think it's going to be one of these cases where we're not going to be following, in general, really inspirational leaders in that. We're going to have to do more and more of that at the grassroots level. And there are lots of organizations in San Francisco, including a few that are represented here today. We're going to have we didn't have to do that exact thing.
I will tell you, the hair attack is waiting San Francisco.
So I'm
is an
gonna,
earthquake.
I'd like to get some of the people who haven't had a chance, so, we'll go Bernie, you in the, and
Right.
then woman in the pink.
I'd like to thank the panel for its intelligent diligence for us all in raising these questions. My question is, however, it's the official policy of San Francisco to not comply with state law mandates. That's the official policy. It's a city county, uniquely in the state, and the administrative district of the state, and a charter city. And it's our official policy not to comply. Given scarce resources, the unaffordability, the most expensive city in the nation for decades now.
What is the climate change?
And I'd like a
related?
response, given the fact how minuscule we are as a city when we need to be engaged regionally and in fact get rid of the bastards.
Bernie, this is, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say this.
It's the big question.
That's a bit too big. Okay, sorry.
All right, I just like to throw out one figure. We have almost 300,000 households who cannot afford market rate housing. And we have no resources to deal with that. And that's just part of climate change.
So maybe we can talk about that in a housing discussion. I think unless Sue, you have a direct response to that, because I think, this is it's
Through the bathhouse.
everything is connected, but I think this is we're getting kind of deviating a little bit.
Well, can I answer it? I won't answer it in a specific way, but in general, one of the things that I've been really, really impressed with, and our small team in San Francisco and also the 350 Bay Area work, is actually how accessible most of our state elected officials are. And in San Francisco in particular, we're kind of blessed because we have, not perfect, but very innovative and forward-thinking state senator in Scott Wiener and in David Hsu and Bill Ting. I'm sure everyone in this room can come up with something they don't like about those people, but one of the things that I've been impressed by is that they actually, we have scheduled meetings with them around specific bills that we're lobbying for, but we've always gone in with how can we help you promote your agenda. They're pretty good at telling us what that is, and it's not hard to find something in there that you really want to work for. Housing turns out to be one of the things that all three of them are very, very focused on.
Yes.
The Sierra Club will not support giving up environmental review to build housing. And we just won't. And that's what SB 35 is doing. Bypassing, and when I say giving up environmental review, I mean the public process. And what that means is that development takes place between somebody in the planning department, a staff person in the planning department, and the developer. And there's no public process at all. So, and the Sierra Club will not. We just won't, we're never gonna give up that right for the public to be engaged in the process of development. And I want to just throw in here, this is a map from Rebecca Solnit's book, and I can't remember the title of it, but this is about once in future waters, so this is just the sea level rise, and we're doing all this in development. I mean, one of the hottest place to develop is right on the waterfront, which is ground zero for sea level rise. And Prop D passed, which is going to build all that housing right on public land, public trust land, the waterfront land, the piers, and supposedly they're putting all this affordable housing, but the Sierra Club opposed it. I mean, for a number of, it's right in the path of sea level rise, and it's got a 10-story parking garage on one city block, and no, this is bad policy. Bad policy. This is not how we should be building. This is not where we should be building, and it is not how we should be building.
Once again, note your top statistic up there.
Yeah, market rate housing.
That was
We
SB
got it already.
35?
So SB 35 is the state bill that's being sponsored by State Senator Scott Wiener, and it's generated a lot of controversy, but the goal is to give developers, to make it easier for developers to develop. And I want to remind people, developers are not environmentalists.
Look
They're
at
not.
Houston. Look at Houston, they're notorious, they say, if you talk to anybody in Houston, they don't have a city planning, the developers can do whatever they
They're not,
want.
and they are not,
It
this
doesn't
is to
exist.
make it easier
Doesn't
for
have that.
developers to develop, and is primarily market rate housing with a small percentage of quote-unquote affordable. So,
And it's incentives, not regulated.
so that's what SB 35 is, being sponsored by State Senator Scott Wiener. Now, everybody talks about solving the affordable housing crisis in terms of building. But there are other ways to do it, and this is essential if we want to do infill housing, we want to fight climate change, and we want to have people living in cities where they can take the bus and walk, and et cetera. We need to repeal the Ellis Act at the state level, and we need to repeal Costa-Hawkins at the state level. The Sierra Club does not have a position on either of those, but I'm going to be working to press Sierra Club California to get positions in support of repealing those, because you repeal those two laws and you open the way for local governments to regulate the cost of housing, to protect low-income people in their homes and regulate the cost of
Tell
housing.
people what Costa-Hawkins is.
So Costa-Hawkins is the bill that was passed in 1995 or 1996 that outlawed rent control. So we have rent control in San Francisco. It outlawed rent control on anything built after the passage of the bill, and it outlaws vacancy control, so that if I were ever to move out of my apartment, it's rent controlled now, my landlady could raise the rent to whatever the market would bear and try to rent it. And it outlaws commercial rent control.
And actually, what I really kind of like about how the conversation has turned is like a lot of these issues are interconnected. And so, you know, and the environment and affordability and inequality, all these things are very much interconnected. I want to get back to the two people that I pointed to and get a few more over here. So, yeah.
I'm a resident of the Richmond district, and I arrived late, so I didn't hear the very beginning of this program, but I haven't heard anything yet about anything that's being done in San Francisco City and County schools. I mean, we're talking about a population of young people that are perhaps, not perhaps, but definitely tomorrow's voters and citizens. And that Oakland Schools actually has a manager of environmental programs in the Oakland schools. And I happen to know her, she's my daughter. She wanted to be here very much, and she wanted to plant a few questions. But there are now 17 schools in Oakland, she's been that manager for about a year, that are green schools. And there's one school in Oakland that has perhaps even renowned in the United States and certainly in California, that it's 100% green, and they actually have a computer solar panel, every bit of their energy is being monitored. And this is an extreme situation, and of course there's many old schools in San Francisco as there are in Oakland. But has the San Francisco City and County School, and maybe there's someone here that represents the school district.
No, they have the equivalent of your daughter here. His name is Nick Kessner. He's fantastic. And
But he's not here in this room tonight.
Correct. He is not here in this room tonight, but he plays the role that your daughter does for San Francisco Unified. And he is their sustainability director. He has a team of 3 people. He has done a deep dive energy assessment of every single school. They have a net zero energy goal for the school district by 2040. They have
So 2040 is their goal.
for every building to be net zero, which is phenomenal. I have no idea how they're going to do that. They
As of today, is there a percentage?
Oh, there is, and I just don't know all of it. But I'm incredibly impressed with the San Francisco Unified School District, what they're doing to green their campuses. Our department has talks to 20,000 school kids a year because we have a very deep environmental program with all the kids. They have zero waste monitors at the lunch, at the counters. We do awards for the green schools. They have really strict pesticide use policies. So I would just, I'm just really impressed with SFUSD. I just can't give all the specifics of what they do, but I bet Nick and your daughter know each other.
Yes, they do. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
And if
this
they
touches
don't, they
on
should.
so much of what has been discussed tonight,
Yeah.
as
No.
far as leveling,
Yeah.
tiering
It's
in
so
our learning
important.
process.
Critically
Okay,
important.
I'm gonna take, so pink shirt, blue, and then 1 and 2, okay.
So my question is more of a personal / maybe philosophical question, to piggyback on previous comments made about current events such as like the hurricanes that just happened and fires. And in terms of just like the feeling of doom that maybe I'm not alone in feeling.
No.
In terms of like climate change being here now. Do you panelists maybe have any personal insights or anything that you would like to share about like not losing hope? And, like
being active.
Yeah.
Such a great question.
So when I'm in classrooms with students and I talk about this, and they're mostly middle school, I tell them, I sort of take your tack. I tell them, I'm not telling you this because I want to scare you or depress you. I'm telling you this to inspire you, because this is your planet and it's, as long as I'm here on the planet, I'm going to be engaged in this struggle and fight, and I want to inspire you to do it and to do it with joy. I don't know. That sounds corny, but that is the best line. That's the best thing. And, to make these changes in your personal lifestyle and figure out how wonderful it is to go vegetarian and to eat, how wonderful the food is, and, just enjoy the challenge.
And I'm convinced that the fossil fuel industry and the investor-owned utilities are counting on our despair. They're actually assuming that we'll be so overwhelmed that we'll just become more and more passive. And it's not too late. It's probably too late to go back to the climate we had in the 60s. But it's not too late to make changes that will allow human life to continue. And I don't think the window's gigantic, but I do think that if we can stop fighting with each other, I think if we stop making the perfect the enemy of the good, and we build on successes, I see lots of positive things happening. When you look at the way the predictions that were made 20 years ago about how much solar we would have and how much it would cost, they were off by a factor of, I think, 17 times. Because when a problem is posed, there are creative solutions. And so that's what we need to do. We need to mobilize our energy and our enthusiasm and the best people and our best mood, and we have to get involved and not stand on the sidelines, because that's the way we'll lose.
Yeah, being active, that's how you feel better. Do something. It's simple as that. Every activist is an optimist.
I want to add to that as the most senior psychiatrist in the room. And also a political activist. The group that I tend to affiliate myself with is Citizens Climate Lobby. We work nationally with our fellow local people. And one of my buddies in CCL says the best way that he's managed his depression is through activism, and he'll swear that it's much better than those activists.
Although the two together are
working in whatever level. I think being involved in the wonk stuff and the policy at the local, at the state, at the national but really engaging is the most protective from the despair that I think all of us have to be in touch with at some time.
And activism should be fun, even if it's deadly serious. The issues, there's so many different things you can do. Do something that you really like to do. You know, don't let somebody else to tell you, oh, you've got to do this, that's the most important thing. Right. Have fun with it yourself.
So here's a fun thing you can do. I said I would come back to this. So SB 100, which is, has several times come up as a really important bill, is at the just short of the finish line. And it is in a committee on the assembly side. And it needs to come out of that committee, needs to be presented in the assembly, and then signed by the governor. If everybody went home tonight and called their state assemblyman, you all know who that is? If you don't, you can figure it out on the internet really easily. And well, if you live in San Francisco, it's one of those two. I'm not sure if every single person in the room lives in San Francisco. They usually have an answering machine. And you can just say, I urge you to do whatever you can to get SB 100 out of committee and to pass it on the assembly floor. And I swear, if everyone in this room does that, it might just push this thing across the finish line. So you could feel really good about it. And then, by the way, if you do that, tweet about it.
So that's really important because that bill is being held up right now in a kind of blackmail around two other bills that are also really important, AB 726 and AB 813, that are threats to the community choice that we have.
Those
both
died today.
They both died today.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they did.
Faster than so.
Yeah, like 6 hours ago.
I was at work.
So I would just add, because I think that is the most important question for anybody here to ask. And I've been really struggling this last week. Whenever I'm having lunch with somebody, I keep talking about how hard it is. And I was talking to Paul Hawken on the phone right before he published his Project Drawdown, and he said something that really blew me away because he's so eloquent. He said, cities like San Francisco are rehearsing the future.
Yes.
And when
Please repeat, I didn't hear.
cities like San Francisco are rehearsing the future. And when the rest of the world is ready, because they've had enough, and they need to look around and figure out what does it look like to have a different future, this is where they're going to turn. And that just gives me shivers when I even say it back. That's the power of where we are in the bubble inside the bubble, in this incredibly precious place that is far from perfect, and it's incumbent on all of us to show up and push San Francisco to be even better. But at the end of the day, we are rehearsing the future by being here and showing up. And that gives me great hope.
So it's time check 8:41. I want to get to as many questions as possible. So I'm going to ask you to keep the questions to 30 seconds and maybe the answers to 1 minute. So that we can get through as much as possible. So yes.
So I actually have a comment to set the question, so maybe I'll let the last question.
Okay, that would be great.
Yes. Is that okay? Okay, hi, my name is Kristen and I go to Lowell High School and I'm the president of my school's environmental club, and I actually interned at the Department of Environment this past summer. But I've recently been sworn into SF Youth Commission, and I was wondering if you guys have any recommendations, because we've created a subcommittee that has environment in it. So I'm like, yes, I think it might be the first time. So I was wondering if you guys have any recommendations about like what I can push for to make proposals and stuff that will directly impact youth and like just our city in general. Big question, but yeah, I wanna.
I mean, I can't, I'm so excited. I'm excited that you are in that position of leadership and that the Youth Commission is going to have an environment committee. It was always kind of a mystery to me that it didn't, and I always felt kind of bad about that. So I would just say, lets you and I talk and brainstorm more, because right now, with under time pressure, I can't think of the most important thing for you to do, but clearly, how do you get your friends not to eat so much meat? I mean, there's so many possible things here, I don't know.
Take it like it's control.
30 seconds, and also, look what other counties are doing, because I know of a case in Marin where a youth, high school level group, they actually go to city council meetings and they testify and they say, what are you doing for my generation? Because you're all gonna be gone in 20 years and we're gonna have to clean up the mess. So, yeah. You know, there's like maybe someone else will.
I just wanted to share something that I learned about yesterday. I'm the marketing director from Climate One, which is a subgroup of the Commonwealth Club. But I don't know if they have some of the most compelling interviews with people I have ever heard in my life. And what they're doing is they're looking at both sides. So they'll bring a head of an environmental group with the head of an oil company. And they have them sit down and talk to each other.
Wow.
And the thing is, that's what has to happen now. Because this is what I also said, because I said, you're bringing in all these thought leaders, but we're all talking to the choir. But really what we need is the bridging. And the thing is, we need to have these conversations, and they need to be sort of neutrally moderated and in this kind of solutions, kind of journalism kind of context.
You can find Climate One podcasts on
YouTube. Yeah, well, on iTunes, and so I just wanted to share, because that's another way to be inspired, is to just see what's coming out, because these conversations are nice.
So for the people that aren't actively active, the number one thing I think you can do is make yourself a cheat sheet of all of your representatives, from the most federal being 45 to your most local being your representative for your district, so you know who to call or write when something comes up. And then my question was, we've put so much emphasis on recycling that we've forgotten about reduce and reuse, and I'm wondering because as much as I love the idea of zero waste, it's still compost waste and recycle waste, and if there's a plan for the future for people to really reduce what's going in their bigger blue bin.
Heck, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you're putting more stuff in your bin, but you're still buying a ton of stuff, and then you have to so anyway.
Can I give one suggestion on that? There are community markets now that sell things like wholesale that you can like scoop instead of having packages on all of your food products.
But I like talking about like
policy,
a larger level, because there was an article recently about so much cardboard going into the ecology, and the guy's recommendation was buy that stuff at a local place instead of from Amazon, which I was like, no, but the real answer would be, do you need that item in the first place, and maybe to buy it? And I feel like we're not, people are like, oh, I'm doing so great, I can eat all these plastic things, because the plastic things are going into the recycle bin, so I'm okay.
Well, Sweden has a big shopping mall that's just everything is recycled in the shopping mall, and there's people there to repair everything, to actually upscale.
But so maybe we need to is not,
Sweden.
just like, recycling should be the last thing we do, as opposed to reduce and reusing.
I've got colleagues here who are like, we're so with you. We are so.
So I guess internally at the Department of the Environment, when we say zero waste and we show you those 3 bins, yes. But there is so much work that we are doing in the department around extended producer responsibility. And also the idea, how do we market just stop consuming? It's a hard marketing message, right?
Right, so when I think of marketing, I'm like, it's good to know that
there is a lot
that but you're so right.
Maybe something that the youth commission could also work on. Messaging.
Start giving credits for bringing your own cans.
So, I mean, and clearly, the fee on bags is a way to just give people an awareness that they can use reusable. And there are some interesting business models on reusable takeout containers that we can do. they're hard to make a business case for, but this is exactly where we need
Well,
to
and
go.
with littering too, because I know centrifugers, littering, but I'm like, well, the real problem would be all the single-use packaging that's getting sold to us. This is like, we keep doing downstream stuff, but no upstream.
You're so right.
Thank you. So in the interest of time,
Yes,
I think we're gonna wrap up. If you want to ask our panelists more questions, if they're available, you can ask them afterwards and you can go for a little bit. But I'd like to start wrapping up, and so maybe we'll have 2 minutes each to say anything else that hasn't already been said, and you know, what can we do here in San Francisco for climate change? And let's see, what order should we go? We'll do Sue, Debbie, and David.
Well, I have no closing remarks, so find an organization you want to get involved in, and get involved, and don't despair. Just don't, because if I agree with David that they're counting on our despair, they're counting on us not to do anything, join the Sierra Club. We, and we don't expect you to come to the meetings. We would love it if you want to and if you get involved at our meeting level. But if nothing else, if all you do is join, you'll get the Yodeler, you'll get our emails, and you'll find out about the issues.
And if you join by September 25th, you could vote in the November election for the chapter.
This is true.
That's right.
This is true.
I would end with a very wise thing I heard from a logger, a logging guy from Libby, Montana. He said 3 things, and I live by them. He says, number 1, democracy works, but it's not a spectator sport, so that's clear what everybody's talking about. Number 2, he said, the world is changed by those who show up, and that's what we all know here. And the 3rd thing he said, which really guides me in my personal life, he said, people will follow those who lead. If you don't have a vision, all you have is a fight. If you don't have a vision, all you have is a fight. And I think David warned us that we're not likely to see visionary leaders, perhaps, and are elected at the federal level, at least certainly not in the short term. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to figure out what our personal vision is that we're working towards, so that we're working towards something, not always fighting against. Because that is when you get demoralized and want to give up. What is that vision? How are we rehearsing the future? And what can each of us do to live that vision each day? That's what I think each day.
That would have been a good place to stop, but I'm going to got to take advantage of my position here. Please visit 350bayarea.org. We would love you to sign up for updates and newsletters. I think you can join the Sierra Club and 350 Bay Area, and probably you'd have room for 2 or 3 other organizations. I think that the biggest challenge is actually for us to find ways to collaborate among ourselves better. I think that we're going to fail if we don't figure out how to pull in the same direction, because I see as much of a problem of the environmental movement working against each other as opposed to taking on the huge challenge. And in San Francisco, you could join us. The 350 San Francisco team is taking on an initiative that we're calling Electrify Everything. And that is based on individuals purchasing 100% green energy and beginning to electrify everything in their own lives. When they buy their next car, make an electric car. When they buy their next range, buy an electric range. And more importantly than the individuals, pushing the city to electrify everything, meaning Muni, meaning their own fleet of cars, and so on. So if you're interested in being part of that, get in touch with us, stop here, and I'll give you my card.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and actually we didn't really get to dive into it. I don't know if you have like 2-3 words about working together.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the power is, right? The power really comes when you have city departments and nonprofits working together towards that common vision, right? Not the fight all the time, but that common vision and figuring out what that is. And frankly, electrify everything is a pretty darn good goal to work together on and figuring out what that means in the different sectors. So I would invite all of you, if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing for you, with you. We have a commission on the environment. Come to a commission meeting, especially the policy committee meetings, because they're a lot more informal and we can talk more than at a formal commission meeting. But the next commission meeting is going to be about zero waste and the new programs that we're rolling out if you're interested. So anyway, thank you. I just really want to say thank you. Thank you, Joni. Thank you.
Right now, it's an idea.
Yeah.
We have to figure